Good evening, everyone. Those of us here at the St. John's Anglican School and those viewing online via the various social media platforms. This is our third in the series of budget consultations for Budget 2026, the usual, I would say, staple event of the preparation of our annual budget. And today we're here at the St. John's Anglican School in Guelph, the part of Grenada that, after 40 years or more, have just won a Carnival Queen, as well as second in our Soca Monarch, right? While we celebrate all these wins for 2025 Carnival, we also have to get down to business and to understand what is happening in our communities and how government can best meet the needs of its people. And I'd like to welcome all of you here tonight, and particularly I want to say good night to our Chief Budget Officer, Mr. Hazard, members of the Ministry of Finance, Budget and Policy Unit within the ministry. My name is David Hopkin. I'm serving here tonight as your Master of Ceremonies, but also as a resident of Guelph and the Acting Deputy PS for Finance. It is my pleasure to be here tonight and to journey with you through this process so that we can share some of the things that we would like to see in the budget and that can change our lives or transform our lives here in the parish of St. John's. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Pastor St. Joseph to the microphone, who would lead us in a word of prayer. Let's stand, please.
Heads, hearts, and hands in unity to reach our destiny, ever conscious of God, being proud of our heritage. May we, with faith and courage, aspire, build, advance, as one people, one family. God bless our nation.
Thank you very much. You may have your seats. So as I mentioned earlier on as we began, that this is our third in the series of consultations on our national budget for 2026. And it's a great pleasure to have those of you here with us in the audience, as well as those who will be viewing online. And you'll be able to share your comments and suggestions as we go through this evening. The main focus is to hear from you as to some of the things that can be put into the budget, not just things that should be done by government, but how government can also get some revenue to help bring these things to reality. So we would like you to share with us later on some of the ideas and suggestions that can be placed in that budget. But to begin our session this evening, it is my pleasure to invite our budget officer, Ms. Akiba Andrews, to do the presentation on what a budget is, or the whole budget process. So it is my pleasure to invite to the microphone Ms. Akiba Andrews. Let's give her a round of applause, please.
A pleasant good night to everybody. Thank you very much, Mr. Hopkin. Thank you so much for being here today. So this process, as we would have mentioned, the budget process is one of the most important process of the national budget. Today we will discuss what it is, how it works, and how your input is vital in this whole budget process. So let's start by asking, what is the budget? What do we mean when we say the budget? Now, the budget is not just numbers on a page. It is a reflection of our priorities as a government and as a people. It is how we decide where to allocate our resources and to meet the needs of Grenada. For example, at home, you may create a budget, and your budget may be for rent, utilities, and even insurance. However, when the government speaks of a budget, we're talking about schools, infrastructure, constraints, and even opportunities. So, the budget is a statement of allocation of financial resources in which the government will use in providing goods and services to help improve the social and economic well-being of the people. Usually that is for a period of 12 months, which we consider as the fiscal year. Now that we know that the budget is an overall statement, we should also know that in order to get to the statements, we have to go through a process. So it is therefore a reconciliation process where ministers, members of legislation, public service, civil society, organizations, and other key stakeholders engage in debate on various issues and agree on the allocation of these resources. Now, when we speak about revenue, we speak about how the country will earn its money during that fiscal year. It can be through taxes, duties, fees, grants, loans, VATs, and other licenses. However, when we speak of expenditure, we speak of how the country will spend, how the country will spend money, basically. We have two types of expenditure. We have the recurrent expenditure, where we speak of the day-to-day running costs. That's things like salaries and utilities. We also have the capital expenditure, where we talk about long-term investment like roads, pensions, and hospitals. We should also note here that the budget must show all source of funds or all expenditure items in the estimates. Some of the sources of funds used by the government are recurrent revenue, grants, loans, savings, and even investments. So we spoke about revenue and we spoke about expenses. Now, when the revenue, is greater than our expenses, it means therefore that we have a surplus, or in layman terms, we call it extra money. However, when the revenue is less than our expenses, we have what we call a deficit. Usually in times like these, the government would either have to adjust its spending or even borrow. So earlier I spoke about long-term investments. So let's take a look at the bigger picture. So the annual budget fits into two larger frameworks, and I'm just going to list them here for you. The government's medium-term strategy, which is the National Sustainable Development Plan 2035, and the country's long-term goals, which is the Vision 75. Now, understanding the budget as a process. Just as any other process, the national budget is guided by rules and regulations, and these help us to be accountable. These help the government, to be accountable. Four of the laws that is guided by the budget process is the Public Finance Management Act, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act, and other supporting laws which we will discuss later down in the presentation. Now let's get into the budget process. The budget process is divided into 3 stages. We have phase 1, which is the preparation. We have stage 2, which is consultation and drafting. And we have stage 3, or phase 3, sorry, which is the approval and implementation. Now let's speak about the preparation. The preparation phase has the first 4 steps of the budget process. Step 1 is the preparation of medium-term development priorities and the macroeconomic and fiscal focus, which my colleague will speak on later on. Within this process, the macroeconomic policy unit develops projections for the country's economy and government finances, things such as GDP growth, inflation, and revenue trends. Step 2 speaks to the derivation of indicative aggregate ceilings to start the budget process. And this speaks to the MTTF, which is the medium-term fiscal framework. Now, in this step, the MTTF sets the spending limit, which is basically how the government can realistically spend without exceeding its revenue. Thank you. So step 3 speaks on the preparation of the budget framework paper and medium-term economic and fiscal strategy. Now this step is simply the government, or it shows the government's spending and how it will manage its resources for the next 3 to 5 years. Step 4 speaks on the preparation and submission of the budget call circular. Now, the 2025 budget call circular stipulates the requirements that must be satisfied and followed in the preparation of the 2026 national budget. Accordingly, it outlines the budget calendar, instructions, procedures, processes, and templates for preparation and submission of the detailed estimates for each vote, and when I say vote here, I'm speaking of the different ministries, pertaining to revenue where applicable, as well as current and capital expenditure for the budget year of 2026, and also 2 forward years for 2027 and 2028. We'll now move into phase 2, which is consultation and drafting. Phase 2 takes into consideration steps 5 to step 8. And step 5 is basically where we're at now, public and sectorial consultations. During this step, the ministry engages with its stakeholders, community representatives, private sector, and civil society to create a budget that can mirror both the economical and social development of our country and its people. Step 6 speaks to the preparation and submission of budget estimates by each vote to the Ministry of Finance. Now again, at this stage, the ministry prepares and each of the line ministries, they prepare and submit, a detailed budget estimate to the Ministry of Finance. Step 7 is where the consultations, the Ministry of Finance has consultations with those line ministries that would have submitted their budgets and other departments. We also revise and finalize the draft budget estimates at this step. So the Ministry of Finance conducts consultations with the line ministries to ensure at least 3 things: internal coordination, accurate budgeting, and government spending aligns with our national goals. Step 8, this is where we have presentations to the Cabinet of the Finance Committee Presentations to Cabinet of Finance Committee of draft budget estimates. Now within this step, the draft budget is presented to the Cabinet and Parliamentary Finance Committee. So we're moving on into phase 3 of the budget process, which is approval and implementation. And we're going to continue with step 9, which is the presentation to Parliament of draft budget estimates and the budget speech. The Minister of Finance presents the budget speech to Parliament, and this enables for public accountability and transparency. Step 10 speaks to the Parliament's debate and budget approval through the Appropriation Act. Now, after the House of Representatives approves the budget estimates, an appropriation bill is introduced and passed. This bill enables the release of funds from the consolidated funds and allocates them through the Appropriation Act to specific departments and ministries. We're going to move into step 11 of the budget process, which is the issuance of the general warrant. So now that we would have had the Appropriation Act enacted, the government now has legal authority to spend. So the general warrant is basically a document that authorizes the government expenditure from the consolidated funds, which takes us to step 12, which is the budget execution. So once the budget is approved, the Ministry of Finance issues guidelines for implementing the estimates of revenue and expenditure. At this point, ministries and departments begin to utilize the allocated funds as per guidelines from the Ministry of Finance. Now, our final step of the budget process is budget monitoring and report. Now, at this step, the Ministry of Finance along with the budget unit oversees implementation and monitors the budget execution. Also, the first quarter allocations are provided to the different line ministries and departments, and the budget unit issues quarterly ceilings by the 10th of the month before the new quarter begins. When we say ceilings here, we speak about a limit, it's a cap. So the ministries would not be able to spend over that amount that is provided by the budget unit. Now, earlier in step 11, I would have spoke to the Approval and Appropriation Act, and I'm just going to go through here the approval process, the different processes that has to flow in order for the budget to be approved. So the Cabinet usually approves the budget around October. Then we have Parliamentary Finance Committee approval, which is done at least 2 months before the end of the fiscal year. Usually that is in the end of October to early November. Then we have the House of Representative debates, and they approve the budget around November, December. We have the Senate debates, and they approve the budget also in December. And basically, once that is done, the Parliament has the sole responsibility and authority to review and approve the proposed budget prior to the commencement of the fiscal year in accordance with the provision of the Constitution. Now, this takes us to one of the latter things that I'm going to discuss with you this afternoon, which is the roles and responsibilities of the budget unit. Because you may ask yourself, where does the budget unit fit into this entire process? And here I'm just going to list them for you. So the budget unit coordinates and manages the development of the annual estimates of revenue and expenditure, as well as the supplementary budget. We also ensure that the budget cycle or calendar is adhered to throughout the process. We also advise the government on the fiscal implications of budget proposals and related implementation issues. So upon parliamentary approval, the budget unit also monitors implementation and execution of the budget. So basically, we ensure that things that have been budgeted for by the different line ministries is actually implemented and carried out. So this takes me to my next slide. Now, in essence, the budget unit coordinates, manages, and monitors the entire budget process, as I would have mentioned before. And the national budget, we should note here that it is one of the most important policy tools, and it demands integrity, seriousness, and public participation. This is where you come in, because we would like to hear your feedback, because it is very invaluable ensuring that the budget actually reflects our collective needs. Thank you very much for your time and commitment. I encourage you to share your suggestions coming to the end of today's proceedings so that we can build a stronger tool for the budget.
Thank you very much, Ms. Akiba Andrews, for outlining for us the whole issue of what a budget is and looking at it from our own personal perspective. We too have budgets at our home, trying to put the best use of the monies we receive from our salaries or wherever else we get our monies from, as well as what we use the monies for. Then she went on to the process that the budget, the national budget goes through from its formulation phase to implementation and monitoring. And all of this, as you mentioned, is governed by a set of laws to ensure that we're doing the right thing and the needs of the community, of the people, or the citizens are always center stage to the preparation of the budget. But at the same time, we have to understand from where we're operating from. So for example, I can't, as a person, go beyond the monies that I'm receiving. I have to also be mindful of different things around me that is going to impact the quality of my spending or my revenue. So to do that, I'd like to invite Mrs. Kimika Donald-Hopkins to do the fiscal framework, macro fiscal framework for the next 3 years. Now, we have to go beyond just 2026. We have to look at it in a good 3 years to get a good sense of where we're at and where we're going and what are some of the things that will impact our national budget. So help me welcome Ms. Kimika Donald to the Hopkins, to the
Okay, residents of St. John, colleagues from the Ministry of Finance, online viewers, pleasant evening to all of you. As stated, my name is Kimika Donald-Hopkins. I'm a policy analyst at the Ministry of Finance. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's consultation again. As Ms. Andrews stated, this is part of our preparations for the 2026 budget. So my presentation this evening will focus on the macroeconomic context within which the upcoming budget is being framed. I will also highlight some key trends and also some risks and opportunities that we should all be considering as we plan together for the 2026 fiscal year. So my presentation is broken down as follows. We're going to have a look at the international and regional environment. Then we're going to review some of the real sector developments in Grenada. We're going to also take a look at the revenue and expenditure performance for Grenada from January to May 2025. And then we're going to look at the medium-term projections for Grenada. So we will begin by examining the international and regional developments, which remains tenuous. So in terms of international developments, we've seen that the world economy is expected to grow by about 3% in 2025, and that is going to pick up slightly to about 3.1% in 2026. Advanced economies, and when we speak about advanced economies, we're thinking about places like the US, Canada, Europe, and so forth. They are expected to grow slowly over the next few years. For example, the US growth for 2025 is looking at 1.9%, and then for 2026, they're estimating 2% growth. But emerging markets and developing countries, such as those in Asia and Latin America, they are going to experience faster growth, and they're going to remain fairly stable. So those are some of the places we should look to in terms of when we're trying to see what policies we can adopt to promote growth in Grenada. Okay, in terms of the regional developments, the average growth for the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union is looking at 3.5% in 2025. And for CARICOM, it's going to be about 3.3%. But when we look at Grenada's real output, we're estimating that Grenada's GDP is going to expand by 4.2% in 2025. So you see that Grenada is expected to grow a little faster than our other sister countries across the Eastern Caribbean and the rest of CARICOM. So we're going to look at some of the real sector developments for the first couple months of the year. Some of the estimates are from up to March, while others might be up to May 2025. So in terms of the agriculture sector, which was severely affected by Hurricane Beryl last year, what we've seen from the information coming from the Central Statistical Office, nutmeg, maize, cocoa, those crops have dropped sharply compared to January to March, in 2024. We see that there has been about a 75% decline in nutmeg, maize, and cocoa production. And for, nutmeg, maize, and cocoa production, yeah. In terms of, nutmeg and maize production, so about just over 70% decline. Cocoa was about 20% decline, so you'll see that 19.3% there. So for M&IB purchases of other crops, and when we speak other crops, we speak about the more short-term crops. So things like your provisions, your seasonings, and so forth. There was a 11.8% decline in their purchases of those crops. And those crops purchases are from those farmers across Grenada. So that's what we're referring to here. So in terms of crops that saw some growth, it was only banana production that we saw a little uptick in, but it was still very little growth for banana production. It was only 1.6% growth in terms of banana. So, as we shape the 2026 budget, we really need to start considering how we can strengthen agriculture production in Grenada, but more so how we can build some resilience into the sector so that when we have natural disasters like we had last year, it doesn't significantly affect our ability to produce in Grenada. In terms of fish production and export, when we compare 2024 and 2025, activity in the fisheries sector was largely unchanged, while fish production and fish export grew by about 1% each. And so you see that 1.0% for fish production, and then that's just the collection of fish in terms of the weight. And then the fish products exports, 1.1%. While that growth is small, I think we still need to commend our fishermen and women when we think about the significant damage their vessels would have got during Hurricane Beryl last year. They were still able to produce as much fish as they did last year when they did not have Hurricane Beryl impacting their vessels. So that is commendable. But we should also think as well, how do we build resilience into the fisheries sector? Because if they can perform just as good as they did last year when they had a hurricane, imagine how much better they could have done this year. In terms of construction and mining, we look at it based on the material imported into the country for construction, as well as the sale of those building and construction materials. For mining and quarrying, we look at the sale of aggregates from gravel and concrete, for example. So construction, imports of materials went up by 35% in the first quarter of 2025. But what we saw is that the sales of construction material actually only grew by, right, so the sales of construction material actually fell by 30%. So while we have a lot of construction material being imported into the country, we've seen that they're not being reflected in the sales from our retailers here in Grenada. So when we had our consultation with them, one of the things they cited is that many persons, especially on the large construction projects, they're directly importing their own construction material. So our local retailers are not getting that sale even though they're importing more. So one of the things you can probably suggest is what measures government can implement to remedy that problem that has been reported. In terms of mining and quarrying, there was a 10% increase there compared to last year. So for the tourism sector, stay-over arrivals fell by 12.7% in the first 5 months of 2025. But what this reflects is the exceptional events that we had last year in the earlier part of the year. You know, we had the 50th anniversary celebrations. We also had Carifta that would have had a lot of persons coming in specifically for those events. So we expect that later in the year, we're going to see some increases in the visitor arrival numbers. We know that we had a big conference in July. Then we also saw the amount of visitors that we had for Carnival. So we're really hoping that those push the visitor arrivals up for the latter part of the year. Where we did saw some growth, though, is in terms of cruise ship passengers. We saw that we had a 17.2% increase in the amount of cruise ship passengers disembarking in Grenada. And if you can see the smaller graph to your left, just below the coat of arms, you can see that the months that had the most visitor arrivals, you see February and March last year in the dark blue. So that's why we can estimate and accurately say that it was the Independence and the Carifta that would have driven those numbers, because that's the major activities that we had in that part of the year. Then also when the Grenada Tourism Authority does their disembarkation forms along with the customs, they usually ask persons, the purpose of their visit, so we can draw that reference. So wholesale and retail trade, we also saw growth there. The sales of retail material, and these figures are excluding building materials which are captured under construction. Those grew by 13.3%. But the retail sales of building material, as I mentioned earlier, that declined by 30%. So without including building materials, there was 25.7% growth in retail trade. But when you look at the building construction materials, we saw a decline there. So the total retail sales, there was a 13.3% growth in 2025 up to March when you compare that to 2024. Transportation and storage. So when we speak about transportation, we're looking here as well at the arrival and, disembarkation and embarkation of airline passengers. So you see that from January to March 2024, in terms of embarked passengers, so that's persons leaving from Grenada, we saw that there were 71,000 persons disembarking. But when you look at 2024, it was 2025. Sorry, it was only 63,000. So it really ties back to what we saw under the tourism sector in terms of arrivals. In terms of inflation, we are seeing there was a 1.6% growth in the price of food, while fuel costs are on the downward trend, but only by 0.3%. So in terms of food and fuel, you know that our food is largely imported in Grenada. So of course our inflation is imported inflation. So if the prices go up outside, then we expect it to go up in Grenada as well. And it's the same thing for fuel. Just a quick look at the labor market. Unemployment continues to decline. We saw that it reached about 12% in Q3 2024, and that's down from the 28% that we saw in 2020 when the prior labor force survey was done by Central Statistics. In terms of the unemployment ratios, we see that it's 7.4% unemployment amongst men, while there's higher unemployment amongst women at 15.8%. And even with that, we see that youth unemployment really remains relatively high as well. Okay, so now we'll just take a quick look at the 2025 revenue and expenditure performance from January to May. In terms of total revenue and grants from January to May, that amounted to 527.3 million, an increase of 2.1 million compared to what we had budgeted. In terms of revenue itself, what we collected in terms of revenue was 514.3 million, and that exceeded the target by $14.1 million. This increase was driven mostly by tax collections, higher than expected tax collections, as well as you would see in terms of non-tax revenue, IMA revenues, and IMA was formerly Citizen by Investment Program. IMA now refers to Investment Migration Agency. We saw that IMA revenues actually was 22.2 million more than we projected to collect. If you want a breakdown of the tax revenue collections, you see that taxes on income and profit, we collected 85.5 million, taxes on property, 15.1 million, taxes on domestic transactions, 92.5 million, and taxes on international transactions, 189.6 million. And just to help you distinguish a bit, domestic transactions, what's reflected here are collections from the Inland Revenue Department. So you will see things here such as your vehicle licensing fees and stuff like that. International transactions primarily collected by the Customs and Excise Division, so your import duties, customs duties, environmental levies, and so forth, you'll see reflected on the international transaction because those are goods coming into the country. Total grants, 13.0 million, for January to May. We were hoping to receive 25 million in grants this year, but we fell short of target by $12 million. In terms of expenditure, total expenditure amounted to $541.6 million. This was 48.2 million less than targeted. Recurrent expenditure is where we saw the lowest spending. Total recurrent expenditure was $377.6 million. But when you look at the breakdown of that, for example, employee compensation, we spent $139.4 million. Goods and services, so that's payments to service providers, utilities, rents and so forth, $73.6 million. Interest payments, so that's interest payments for government's loans, $17.1 million. And then current transfers, $147.5 million. And current transfers includes things like payments to the statutory bodies and so forth that receive subventions from government, etc. So you'd see of that current transfers amount, 24.5 million were IMA expenses, Investment Migration Agency, that was their subvention for that period. In terms of capital expenditure, that was $164.0 million. Capital expenditure here, we're speaking of spending on major infrastructure projects, roads, rehabilitation of buildings. We acknowledge the arrival of our Minister of Finance, Mr. Honorable Dennis Cornwall. Joining the head table. Right, so capital expenditure, we spent $164.0 million. That was 0.7 million more than we had budgeted to spend for that period, January to May. So in terms of the fiscal balances now, instead of running the large deficit we planned for, we recorded a primary balance surplus after grants of $2.8 million. This is a big turnaround compared to the EC 44.4 million deficit, primary balance deficit that we had originally projected. And on the overall balance side, we were expecting to be in a deficit of about 64.6 million, but our deficit was only $14.3 million. So that means we performed $50.3 million more than expected, and that was on account of, one, the lower than budgeted expenditure on recurrent expenditure, so salary and so forth, employee compensation. And so you see that even though we overspent a little on capital expenditure, we still had some savings from the recurrent expenditure side, as well as from the additional revenues we collected from the Investment Migration Agency, as well as some of our tax sources. So the estimated outturns, so this is now we're looking at full year 2025. And when we speak estimated outturns, what we do is we revise our projections that we would have done when we did the budget. And how we do that is we look at the performance year to date so far, and we see how we would have done compared to the budgeted so far. And then we revise those, assuming that we'll continue on the same path for the rest of the year. So in terms of our estimated outturns for revenue, we expect that at the end of December 2025, we're going to collect $1.2 billion in revenue, and that is going to be $14 million more than we projected when we started the budget process for 2025. In terms of total expenditure, we see that we are likely to spend 1.6 billion in expenditure, and that is going to be 48.2 million less than what we would have projected when we did the 2025 budget. In terms of our primary balance, including grants, we see that we're going to have we're likely to have a primary balance deficit of $161.5 million, and this is a smaller deficit than the $208.6 million deficit that we thought we would have had. So if we continue on track, this is how government performance is likely to look towards the end of the year. So the medium-term outlook. This is our last section before I wrap up. So the medium-term outlook. Now, when we speak about the medium term, we look at the 3 forward years. So when we do a budget, we do a budget for the year coming as well as 2 forward years. So the 2026 budget is going to have the estimates for 2026 as well as projections for 2027 and 2028. And that's what we consider the medium term, those 3 years. So in terms of GDP growth, GDP is expected to grow by 3.0% in 2026. But let's look at 2025 first. So for 2025, we're expecting GDP to grow by 4.2%. And some of the sectors that you're going to see driving that growth include agriculture. We see that 6.0% there, which is a huge prospect when you consider the 23.9% decline that we had in 2024 in terms of agriculture. We also see that construction as well is going to continue to do well, 8.6% growth in 2025. Wholesale and retail trade also expected to do well, 5.0% growth. So Grenada's medium-term outlook, it does point to a bit of stabilization. The sectors that I indicated, they are going to be the ones driving the growth. But we don't just want to see growth in those sectors. We'd also like to see the other areas performing just as good. So that is what we should also be focusing on in our discussions today. So how can we get, for example, manufacturing to grow from the 1.4% projected for 25 to maybe a 3% growth? What are some of your ideas in terms of boosting manufacturing for Grenada? So that is some of the discussions that we need to have. How can we, one, achieve those projections that we've presented, but even more so, do better than we would have predicted by directing more support to some of the sectors that really need our help. And I don't have the slide here, but I'm just going to briefly let you know what the 2026 budget priorities are. They are largely unchanged compared to 2025. So we're going to be completing the resilient recovery and reconstruction efforts post-Hurricane Beryl. There is still a lot to be done. So we're going to be continuing some of that as well into 2026. We're going to be accelerating investments under the government's transformative agenda. That includes education, skills development, health and wellness, low-cost housing, and the transition to renewable energy. And if you've been keeping abreast with government news, you'd realize that those key transformative areas are linked to the top 4 projects for the government of Grenada. So in terms of education and skills development, we have Project Skills. In terms of health and wellness, we have Project Polaris, which is the construction of the new climate-smart teaching hospital. In terms of low-cost housing, we have Project 500. And in terms of the transition to renewable energy, we have Project Renewable Energy. So those are some of the projects that you really need to be following when you want to know what it is that government is prioritizing at the time. In addition to those, we'll also be looking at enhancing productivity and resilience across key productive sectors. And that's those sectors that I would have presented today. So agriculture, fisheries, tourism. And then we also have a new sector to look at that we have been looking at, culture and the creative industries as well. We'll also be strengthening physical and digital infrastructure to support economic transformation, protecting vulnerable groups and promoting gender equality through targeted social protection measures, building resilience to natural disasters and external shocks. And this is a key one. because we want to ensure that if we get another Hurricane Beryl, we can get back on our feet quicker, and we don't even get knocked down as hard as we did last year, because we have built some more resilience into our infrastructure, into our programs and so forth. So that as well is recommendations that we would like to hear from you. And then finally, enhancing citizen safety and security across all communities. So those are the 2026 national budget priorities. We'll publish those as well so that you can always reference them. And then it could also help when you make your contributions to the 2026 budget portal that we have on finance.gd. So if you just type that into your web browser, it'll take you to a pop-up for the budget consultation portal. You can make your contributions there as well towards those key priorities. So my last slide, we're just going to look at some of the downside risks to Grenada's macroeconomic outlook. Now, I did say that the outlook is very promising. We see that we have growth in some of our key sectors, but we must always remember that there are risks to the present outlook. Unpredictable events that could just disrupt everything that we've projected or expected to occur. And these include natural hazards. Grenada is a small island development state. We are in a hurricane-prone area. We saw what Hurricane Beryl did last year, and hurricanes remain a threat. I did see a notice earlier today about increased seismic activity at St.Jojn'S. So all of these things that we need to keep in mind when we're planning for the future. Grenada's economic and fiscal situation is closely tied to global events. So you need to be listening to the news in North America, Europe, Asia. What's happening there? What's happening in the places where we get our food from? If they're having challenges, we're going to have challenges as well. So we also need to keep that in mind. Ongoing conflicts in some of the oil-producing countries, those could affect us. We don't have the report from our technical working group on oil and gas as yet. So we're still dependent on imported fuel. So we need to know what's happening out there. Are we going to be getting increased fuel prices? Is fuel prices expected to decline? These are some of the things that we need to think about when we're asking government to direct its resources. In terms of the global outlook, I did say that growth in the major economies is expected to grow at a slower rate. So that is something that we expected to keep in mind as well. Because when we have uncertain trade policies and so forth happening around us, they will directly impact us. So we need to keep them at the front of our mind. And when we're making our recommendations, we need to think ahead. If this happens in another country, what is something that the government can do right now to ensure that it doesn't affect us, or that we can more quickly respond to it? So that's some of the questions I just want to throw out to you as we now enter into the discussion part of this evening's consultation. So I thank you for your time. If you have any questions for me, I'll take them. We also have the Minister of Finance here, who will also be responding to any of your queries and so forth. So thank you for your time, and do enjoy the rest of your consultation. I said I'm a policy analyst, so I would really like to write a policy to Cabinet recommending something that was said here today. So I'm really looking for that big ticket item that I can go to the Prime Minister with and say, no, this is a good idea that came from St.Jojn'S, and I want to write the project proposal for it. So let me hear your thoughts and ideas. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the session.
Thank you very much, Kimika, for such a comprehensive overlook of our fiscal landscape and where we're functioning from. I know she invited you to share your views on, or if you have any questions, but before we do that, I would like to invite our Minister for Finance, Honorable Dennis Cornwall, to make some remarks, and then we'll take those questions. Let's welcome our Minister, please.
Good evening, everyone, and let me say thank you for turning out to be part of this noble consultation that we are trying to have throughout the various parishes of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. Now, tonight I'm wearing two hats. One as the Minister for Finance responsible for this budget consultation that is now taking place throughout Grenada. And I'm also acting Prime Minister for today and a couple other days ahead of me. Now, I got here at this point in time, not because I was, not conscious about the timing this activity was starting. I was coming from my consultations in my constituency of St. Patrick East. And so on my way to St. George's tonight, I said I should stop in to support the staff of the budget department, the staff of my public relations office, the other persons, heads of departments around. And to you, this wonderful audience, I wanted to be able to impart some information to you if needs be here tonight. So I won't be long because I know that I want to make sure that they keep within the schedule and timing. And so I would say welcome to our ongoing consultation for this 2026 budget. We have had consultation in St. Patrick at the McDonald College. We have had one last night at the Bonnet Primary School, and tonight we are at the St.Jojn'S Anglican School. Tomorrow we'll be in St. David's, and then up to about September 3rd or 4th, we'll do the rounds, St. George's, St. Andrew's, and we'll end up in Carriacou at the end of the day. So there is ample time for you to be part of this ongoing consultations. And again, consultation doesn't necessarily mean the amount of people that is sitting in this room. I know online we have a lot of people tune in to basically be able to understand what is happening and to ask questions themselves if there is need be. But I encourage you to ask questions. I am not sure why our MP for St. John's is not here tonight, but again, I know sometimes we have very busy schedules and so on, and so I will take the space of her and answer questions that may be posed from the citizen of St. John's. And if I cannot answer the question, I'll basically forward the comments to her at some point in time. So without further ado, I would want to say thank you for coming out, but at the same time, you are free to ask as many questions as you can. Taking into consideration, we have a time limitation at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister for Finance and Acting Prime Minister for Grenada, this moment. So the floor is open we'll start with questions based on the presentations, both the budget process and the fiscal landscape for Grenada moving into the 2026 budget. Do we have any questions? Or if you have anything that you want to clarify based on the presentations. Okay. So if we don't have any questions, I think the presentations were quite clear and pointed as to, first of all, what the budget process is all about, and two, the fiscal position we're in here in Grenada, and where we can move forward for the 2026 and even looking beyond that moving forward. So now it comes to the ideas that you have to improve livelihoods as well as revenue for government. Who will go first to give us some ideas? Okay, so we have Mr. Matthew Joseph.
Right. Good night, head table. Good night to everybody. My name is already said, so I don't have to repeat that again, right? Okay, Mr. Hopkins, good night. There are a number of items here, I don't want to call them issues, that I would like to raise. Now, first of all, I think the timing of the consultation is a little bit of an issue for me. I was sitting there and wondering why not have the consultation start after school has started, like next week? So we try to involve through the schools, the Form 5s and the Form 4s. I think we are looking down the road in terms of the future. And these people, they are very bright people. And I think in cooperation through the school, they may well know of the consultation tonight, but they are not honest. And as a result, they should not. As I said, bright people. Okay, so that's just one I just showing out to the team. Wow. I think the country is on the right path. I think so. But as we all know, there is always room for improvement. Always room for improvement. Now, there are some wastage within the system. And this wastage has an economic cost. In fact, we refer to them as economic wastage. Now, I think that within the system, especially the public system, I think the problem is middle management. Middle management. Sometimes we blame workers and say they're not producing, or they're producing at 40% when they should be producing at 100%. But where are the managers? Where are the managers? And I think that if we tighten that area and we get what we are paying for, I think the country can save a lot of money. And let me just give you one little example. Someone who leaves their office at 2 o'clock, go out to do something, probably don't even come back. There are times they ask for excuse, there are times they ask for permission, but at times they don't ask for anything. And these things happen within the system. Though you are paying somebody for 2 hours work they did not do because they left 2 o'clock. And these areas I think we need to tighten. I don't know if it's retraining, I don't know if it's, I don't know what, but we need to do something about these mid-level supervisors. Even on the road, you see the bushing taking place and there are supervisors, but the quality of the work in some instances, a lot to be desired. So at that level, that mid-management level, because the policymakers make the policy in good faith, but the execution and delivery, that is where we have some problems. Now, when we designing this budget, this year, next 2026 budget, I would like to see a sort of shift, a sort of refocusing, in that we can bring down the percentage contribution to GDP of SGU. Not bringing down the value, but the percentage contribution to GDP. So if we can develop the policies that grow the economy, it means, therefore, that we bring down the percentage. And I'm saying this for a reason. Now, it appears that external shocks are just lurking around the corner. Now, SGU contributes over 20% to GDP. What if there is an external shock? What if there is an external shock? And we all know what I'm talking about. It can create some problems for us. So we have to develop our macroeconomic plans so that we reduce that percentage. The value could grow, but we have to try to reduce and remove some of the, on SGO. Also, Mr. Chair, the issue of grants. I think we should develop a 10-year plan to virtually get rid of grants. Virtually get rid of it. Because grants is a hope. You may get it. If the other party has a shock, we may not get it. Some people might argue that grants is a normal thing. I understand that. But reduce our dependence on grants. If we get it, it's a blessing. So I'm saying here, what we need to do is to look at our fiscal policies, look at our macroeconomic plan and plan accordingly in relation to these things I'm talking about here. Some years ago, about 3 years ago, well, I was in the parliament at the time. And I realized by reading a document from, I think it was Port Authority, the document said that of all the cargo handled at the port, only 4% was export. 4% was export. And I really hope that number is correct. And I think it is 4%. What it says is that we are not exporting anything. Now, this is an area we have to look at. And it might be a 5-year program, 5-year plan, but we need to look at it. I was at the port recently, and I've never seen containers like that on the port in my life. But things are just coming in and not much going out. So we have to tailor again our economic plan to deal with the situation of low exports. And now I want to tie this in with the nutmeg situation, as was mentioned earlier. Now we are seeing a sharp decline in the production of nutmeg. And that's a fact. But we are not seeing a sharp decline in the rural population. People are literally leaving the rural communities for whatever reason. So if people leave the rural communities, it means that there will be a labor shortage and a lot of the lands will go abandoned. Now, I was a director of the GCNA for years, and I learned a lesson there. At one time, GCNA only had between 500 and 600 people selling nutmegs, only that number. Price was $2 a pound. I don't know if it's by the hand of fate or what, but the price on the world market went right up. And GCNA was able to raise the price to $5 a pound. In about 2 to 3 months, the number of people selling nutmegs moved to 3,500. So what drives them is what they're getting for the nutmeg. Now, on average, GCNA buys from the farmers something over 2 million pounds. Presently, the price is $3. I am thinking here now, what if the government, and there are areas we can cut waste and cut fat to deal with what I'm talking about, can contribute $2 per pound to the farmers. So now he receives, instead of 3, 5. I have the numbers, but I don't want to go through all these little details here. Bring it up to 5 and see what happens. And at the same time, if the price goes up to 5, the farm support program will cut it out. Because now the farmer can afford to hire his own labor. There is an estimate a couple of years ago which says that the country and GCNA was losing over 500,000 pounds of nutmeg per year. If the price goes up to $5, that volume will come into the system. If the farmer doesn't want to pick it up, the thief will still pick it up. I mean, it's not a nice thing to say, but the thieves will pick it up, and it will get into the system. So that 500,000 pounds or thereabout that goes to waste, you divide it by 2. That's because we sell it dry, and then you get what? Approximately $9,000 per ton, and you see the income just from that. But the spill-off effect is what is important. And this is very, very critical, nutmeg, very critical. Because nutmeg starts in the hills, but there is a whole downstream. And only 40% of all jobs in agriculture takes place on the farm. The other 60% are downstream. So we have to try to see how best we could save the nutmeg industry. I did not use the word subsidize. Deliberately did not use it. I prefer to use price support. Because subsidy is not a very nice word as far as I concern. Again, if we grow the economy, and sometimes we have to do as the Chinese, 5 years, 5 years, 5 years, but you have a 20 years plan or a 30 years plan. We grow the economy, then we can, again, reduce the importance of the CBI. I know citizen by is investment something now, right? Yeah, kind of in old school still, CBI. Right. Yes, we reduce that because, again, that one is exposed to a lot of shock, external shocks. And that's some things we have no control over. We have no control over. So these are important, the SGU and the CBI and so on. But let us try to reduce our dependence on some of the things by growing other sectors of the economy. I have a little issue with implementation. Sometimes I think we draw up the budget, we have vote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the votes are, right? And sometimes I get the feeling, Mr. Chair, that we have the plan, but we don't have the people to execute or to deliver. For example, youth in agriculture, budget 1.3 million. Lighting of Carrico Airport, 250,000. I calling them deliberately. Let me see. Feeder Road, 10 million. River Road, 8 million. Southeast Bay, 1 million. Government buildings, new and renovated, we're spending 9 million. The fiscal year is not up as yet. I understand that, and I factor that in. But the question is, where are we with these budgeted amounts? Where are we with these budgeted amounts? And sometimes I think things are happening, probably we don't know. But it appears that some of these projects are just moving a little slow. Snake Road Bridge project started since under the last administration. Like he on pause. Can't finish. Pause, I mean real pause. Since in the last administration, 3 years under the last administration. Implementation. I don't know again if the problem is middle management or whatever it is. But I think we need to tighten. We need to tighten up there. Mr. Chair, what was said in the last, and I really don't hope I'm holding up anybody, in the last budget delivery in relation to vehicles and the age, I really would like to see this go on pause for a while. You see, there are a lot of vehicles in Grenada, but there are not too many vehicles in Grenada. I don't care what anybody says, but plenty of vehicles in Grenada, too much. I never see a traffic jam from Florida to Guelph where I live in. I never see a traffic jam from Victoria to Guelph. There are a lot of vehicles in the southern part of the island because of a number of reasons. But the issue of overcrowded in terms of vehicles, I don't see that. Now, if we move in to reduce the age of vehicle, I think what we need to do, parallel to that, is to move in the direction of a more efficient public bus service. Because these things work hand in hand. My wife would want a car to go to town because she capsized in the bus stand one night. So she will say, well, you see me, I ain't going back in the bus terminus. People fighting for bus. And she capsized. So it's easy for her to say, well, look, let me get a car. So when I go in town, I go on my own time and I come back. I don't have to go to that. So if we are reducing the age, and the implication is reducing the numbers, I think we have to watch the public transport system. Because one seems to hinge on the other. If you have an efficient public transport system as we had in the revolution, there's no need. You may want a car, but there is no need for one. Because right now, I tell you now, it's mass in the bus terminus after 6 in the evening. It's mass in the bus terminus, right? So I think this is something we need to look at before we implement that reduction in the vehicle age. There is a building, and I want to come on to go off now for a little while. We have an old public works building there. And I think we should start thinking about consolidation. If you have to redo it, we redo it. We can't continue renting space. We have a space for the electoral office. We have a space for the parliamentary office. We have a space for the social service office. I mean, 3 bills we're paying. Why not consolidate? Repair the building, tear it down completely, and we build and put the offices there. You know, Mr. Chair, I think it's vote 1. The Governor General, $20,000 a month, you know, for 20 years. Check the amount of millions. You know, these are things I think we need to address. We need to address and try to. We cannot do everything one time. And I'm not saying that we could do everything I say here one time, but I'm just showing these things. These things out. Food sovereignty. That is agriculture again. I know the government trying its best. Government is trying its best, but we need to do as much as we can. Get an extension division that is attached to a marketing division, that is attached to the MNIB, the new MNIB, and deal with distribution. Extension, we need to revive, it's almost there. But the extension, people should know what's going out there. Then there's a connection to a marketing branch, and then you move on. Because you can't have one here, one there, and one over there. Right, so these are some of the items oh yes, one final one. There are some abandoned estates in the country. Totally abandoned, right? And there are some that are on its way to being abandoned. I think we need an intervention. I think the policymakers need to call these estate owners and have a sit down with them. We're not doing as Malima. We ain't taking land and pay you. Have a discussion. And say, hey, I realize this is the trend with your farm. What is going on? What is your plan for the farm? You have no plan for it? Okay. We will acquire it and we will compensate you. But if you acquire it, we must have a plan for it. And I think we need to do that. There is an estate by me where I live. I live in Florida. Watch. That estate has potential. I just sit down and sometimes just scratch my head, you know, and wonder if I born the wrong time. You know. Because this place has so much potential. Water all the time. Road network is there. And not much is happening. You know, so I think somewhere along the line, we need the intervention. Have a sit down with these people, talk to them what you want to do with it, and we move forward. We move forward. Right? So these are the few things that I had. And I am saying them with no bad intention. My intention is that we're able to grow the economy and have a 3 little grandchildren that will get a better Grenada to live in. You know what I mean? Okay? All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you, and I allow Minister to make some comments on your contribution.
Okay, good night again, and let me say thanks to the gentleman for raising a number of issues that concerns us throughout Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. I'm not saying the way he puts it is probably the best way to put it, but I would not dispute that. There are challenges in Grenada. Take, for example, the one that you referred to about the age of vehicles coming into the country and the transportation system that we currently have here in Grenada. I know the government has, in one case, implemented a pilot project run by the Ministerial Transportation to deal with the students that are going to school. I know that program would have to run for 6 years before we can, 6 months, before we can basically decide what direction that we need to go. Again, the number of buses that we have on our roads may or may not be sufficient to deal with all the persons who are using public transport. Notwithstanding that, there is, in my opinion, too many private vehicles on the road. Because just buying a vehicle doesn't mean that because you can afford a vehicle, that's the way to go. Because at the end of the day, you have to find parking in St. George's or wherever you're going for that vehicle. Some of these vehicles are dumped, should I put it that way, in Grenada. And I said dump, I mean literally dumped. You go on the internet and you can find a vehicle that probably you can bring in for $40,000, $50,000 and so on. Are we aware that some of these vehicles, they stop making parts for those vehicles? Take for example, Japan, that makes the gasoline type vehicles, are no longer making those vehicles. And when we bring them in our country, and we need, for example, the brakes or something like a light, and you can't find it in the market, where does it end up? On the graveyard, in the car business or the transportation business. So we have to look at that not only because the government has moved to basically restrict the age of the vehicle that you can bring into the country. We have stated very clear that it might be a better proposal to bring in hybrid and electrical vehicles in the country brand new, because we have reduced the duties on that to somewhere in the region of 25%. However, some people go online, they see a hybrid vehicle or electrical vehicle. It might be 15, 16 years of age and they bring it in the country. Some of those vehicles, the battery life is almost expired. Do you know that an electrical vehicle, to replace the battery when it's over those ages, it costs as much as the car itself? Because in an electrical vehicle, there is nothing called an engine in the front nor the back. You may have a battery under your seat or one in the trunk, and those things have a lifespan. So, the policy that the government is taking is basically trying to get people to understand the economics of trying to bring in electrical vehicles and hybrids to the country at this point in time. There is a rationale behind it. Don't tell me that somebody for the last 6 months goes out there and import a vehicle and bring it to Grenada, and they come to the ministry and begs the minister to basically release that vehicle, because the policy is you're not supposed to bring in vehicle over 5 years into the country. Give the exception for the heavy-duty vehicles like the tractors, the front loaders, big trucks, and so on, which is another problem. I could tell you what it is. So, there is too many vehicles on the road in Grenada as we speak. We would like it or not, but there is too much vehicle on the road. Just take, for example, the government has spent monies in recent times in building the bridge or the road in Molina. Have you ever passed it recently in the morning or the night? Always traffic jam going in and out. Go to that place in the other side of the country, Laborie. We spent millions of dollars in building that Laborie road. From since you leave Confer and you're coming up and you hit that halfway mark, vehicles park on both sides of the road coming up, both morning and night. The question is, have we spent all this money just to build a car park for the people in Laborie? I say we have to resolve those problems. Again, the government has to enforce certain things to make sure certain things do not get out of hand. If a fire takes place, let's say in Grand Mall, and the fire truck has to come from, let's say, Guave to Grand Mall, I'm certain it would meet difficulties on its way down because too many vehicles are parked on the road. People have to take cognizance of the fact that we need to start looking at building car parks on our property, or the government will be forced to build car parks to make sure that our roads are free flow rather than having all the conditions that we have there. I want to move on to another point that you make about growing the various sectors of the economy and making sure that there is a wider spread and reduce the reliance on some of the sectors that are going to be affected by any of the problems that we may have, be it a hurricane, be it COVID that we had in 2019, 2020, where nothing moved within those countries and so on. And you would have experienced the kind of ghost town that we had in some places, and businesses were closed. And even now, some businesses never recovered from the COVID pandemic. So, yes, when we're planning or when we're doing our work, as you would have actually heard from Kimika on this idea, that yes, we take all those factors into consideration. We project, for example, where our debt to GDP would be in 2035 already. But we have to work towards achieving those goals and so on. So yes, the point of basically making sure that each sector of the economy produces what it needs to produce, and at the same time, the over-reliance on one over the other is a good point. But we cannot just sit down and let those things happen by magic. The estates that you talked about that are idle and so on, yes, we do know that that is a problem. We have, at the Ministry of Agriculture, talked about getting youth involvement in agriculture. We were willing to even provide them with lands to do it and so on. But again, you don't want a guy to say, well, okay, you want 5 acres of land to cultivate. And the first year or two that he experienced some difficulty and so on, the land goes back into idleness again. So yes, I think we have to plan it properly. We have to do it well so we can take advantage of our agriculture sector. Look at last year, the government brought in over 460 something pigs, goats, and sheep into this country. You know what that was done? It was done to basically improve the animal stock in this country to provide us with meat and other derivatives of that. We're still importing cows and so on from St. Vincent because we don't have a structured, continuous, sustainable cattle business in Grenada. And we also have to look at that. You talked about, for example, you see the exportation going out of Grenada to be around 4%. I would not challenge the percentage that you said. But at the same time, 95% of our food sometimes comes from outside. The chicken, which we can't stop. We're talking about making improvements in the chicken business. We are now building a hatchery to help us minimize the amount of chicken that come from Miami in terms of the birds or Barbados. But we are not there yet. The feed for those animals is another challenge that we have. Farmers will tell you that they cannot afford the feed to basically make a meaningful profit on the farm because the price they're paying for it. Yes, we have to look at all of that. So, we have been promoting grow what you eat, but how many of us follow it? We will leave our bananas in the field to rot in some cases and so on. And we go out there and we're bringing in all kind of foreign foods in cans and other things. So our people have to have a mindset to deal with all of those issues. It cannot be done by government alone. The farms that you see are abandoned out there, some of them, yes, they are government lands. But they are private individuals that have large swaths of land, and they're doing nothing about it. You give a very good example when you said, for example, that at one point in time there were less than, let's say, 1,000 farmers picking up nutmegs and so on. Once the price went up to $10 a pound, you said, $5 a pound. Then you had thousands of farmers selling nutmegs. Whether or not they planted nutmegs or they treated nutmegs, as you put it, it happened. We have to be mindful also that we recently had major hurricanes. Ivan devastated the nutmeg industry in Grenada by far. Beryl did the same thing in recent times. We tried to incentivize farmers to go back in the fields and plant the nutmeg, the cocoa, the bananas, and so on. But how many young people we see involved in that? They are not there. The guys who basically labored and make the nutmeg industry and the cocoa industry what it was in the past, they have long gone. And unless we are able to basically motivate our young people, our youth, to basically do that, we're going nowhere. We have in recent times gotten scholarships for students to go to Guyana. We have sent the first 6, now I think we have another 9 to go in the next couple of months. Again, we need to basically train our people, get the youth involved, and to help bring agriculture back where it should be. Because it won't happen with all the investment that the government put into the industry. After Beryl, we expended $34 million as incentive to farmers. Some people claim they didn't get a put in now. We still have to look at it and so on. But a lot of monies have been pumped into the agriculture sector in Grenada. I'm not too sure if it's going in the right direction because some people may get the money and not put a penny back into the agriculture sector. So yes, there are challenges that we are facing in those areas and so on. And we do take those into consideration when we do our budget and we're planning our 10-year plans or 15 years plan. We take in consideration those things. Even, for example, the things that we basically say that we have to be mindful of, the hurricanes, the perennial larceny that we are affected by, with people basically think that they can just walk into a man's farm and take his fruits and vegetables and so on. Even the small animals like the goat and the sheep and so on. There are stories outside the guys telling you that the guys take the vehicle, dress them up in clothes, and put them in the vehicle and go with it and so on. So it's not an easy road. And we have to basically be serious about this thing. We cannot just talk about it and not put our hands to the plow and get it done. So thank you for your suggestions, and rest assured, the ministry is looking at all fronts to make sure that we can build a better Grenada for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your response. And we have another question or comments, suggestions for the budget. Mr. Litton.
Pleasant good night to the head table. My name is Litton Taylor, and I'm here to speak on 3 topics tonight. One is accessibility. When we have some activity in Guave, especially, for example, we had a funeral Monday, and the traffic hold up for an hour. I'm suggesting that we have an alternative road through Douglaston to end up on the top of Guave Estate. I'm asking for the government to look into that area because there is a bridge in Douglaston, the concrete truck cannot pass on it. So we have to do something about that bridge. And then the connection, Douglaston Estate had a whole set of road connection. The foundation is there, but the accessibility is not there. So I'm asking the government to look into that connection from Douglaston to Guave Estate. So whenever we have any activity in Guave, we have that bypass so we could flow free. That is road. Agriculture now. As the first speaker mentioned about the estates, we have Douglaston Estate, 800 acres of land. We have over 40 acres of land of cocoa, just in vine and big bush. We have approximately 25 acres of nutmeg, just there. There is a decline in nutmeg. There is a decline in cocoa. We should try to look at some rehabilitation. Yes, Douglaston Estate is private owners. The owners, for the past 20 years, they can come up with a settlement to make a decision to settle the land. Just recently, the High Court gave them 6 months to come up with the ultimatum to make a decision. So with that right now, I'm asking the government to step in and do something with that. Because, for example, there is no more lands for housing and things in Guave, Loreto, Black Bay. There is no more land for that. So Douglaston Estate could fill that gap. We could get a 50 acres plot to put on a government housing settlement. We could also do a farm for the schools. So the school feeding program, we could have that farm for the schools. The schools produce their own food. Eat what you grow, grow what you eat. My next topic on Guave. Everybody complain, Guave dead, Guave dead, Guave dead. I would like to see for the month of June, July, and August, implement a water park in Guave. So the 29 June celebration and carnival, we could have a nice spin-off, economical spin-off with that activity with the water park. So that could create, Guave could come back alive. The tongue that never sleep, now we sleeping. Let's create something. And my final point is the overhanging on our roads, especially St. John's. I'm here putting myself for employment. So, the head table, Mr. Finance Minister, could you budget something for cutting overhanging? So I'll get a work.
Okay, thank you again for your suggestions. Again, I do not want to put spokes in your wheel, but again, I think I would want to make some comments. Now, the overhangings on the road, the mango trees, the breadfruit tree, the coconut trees that we've seen, the big trees that we don't know the name, they are in a state that they are in because people have abandoned the land. I recall just only a month or two ago, I was coming through Maran, and I saw these trucks and somebody on the trees cutting the branches, cutting the overhangings and so on. I think probably it will be related to Grenada trying to protect the lines. But a lot more needs to be done in that direction, and not only in Wharf, but all over Grenada. You know why we have so much landslides going on throughout the country? One, either we cut the trees badly, meaning that we actually weaken their roots and everything, and so when the first set of rain falls, it basically breaks the land and comes in the road. So I believe that, yes, we have to continue maintaining the overhangings cutting, and also to ensure that we don't cut it so bad so it basically creates another problem for us. I wanted to say that the larger estates that are owned by private people and they are not working it. I remember over the years we basically made agricultural lands in Grenada non-taxable. I think I may not be speaking for everybody in this country, but I think we probably need to look at taxing idle lands in the country. And if and when they didn't pay it and so on, the government can acquire it. Because it makes no sense that the government acquire lands and pay you for your land, but we still don't have the resources to basically farm those lands. We cannot take our agricultural lands and build houses on it, although we have done it over the years. I have known places and so on that used to be nice cocoa lands. Go in there right now. Houses of all sizes are there. And some people have the gumption or the gall to tell you that they shouldn't pay tax on agricultural land. It's no longer agricultural land. They built house on them. It's now becoming a residential area. And so we have to look at revising our taxation to deal with those problems. Only last week, a gentleman wrote me a very lovely letter. He said for 30 years, he never get a bill from the Inland Revenue Department for tax. And all of a sudden, after 15 years, he gets a bill from the Inland Revenue Department telling him he has this amount of tax plus interest and penalties and so on. What does he expect me to do? If you own a property and you don't know that you own that property and you are liable for tax, then something has to be wrong. We're probably looking in the wrong direction. So I'm saying that to say, yes, the excuse about you didn't get a bill from the Inland Revenue Department, or you didn't know you were off island, or you have family issues and so on, does not make it right for you not to pay your tax. And gone are the days when you're saying that, oh, well, I have only agricultural lands, and I'm not supposed to be paying tax on that. We need to review those things. I stop here.
Thank you, Minister. We have another suggestion.
Good evening to the head table and my colleagues here. I'm so glad, my name's Mary Teresa Jerome. I'm so glad that the first speaker addressed the issues that I came here to address. The issue of, and the second speaker spoke about the major drop fall of nutmeg and mace and cocoa in Grenada. I am a returnee. 25 years ago, I returned home, knowing that we had to look at the way in which nutmeg and cocoa were treated by the subsequent generation because I was born in it, I grew up in it, and I saw my parents die in it. And when I came home on holiday, I realized that the generation who nurtured nutmeg and cocoa were dying. And we needed to train the subsequent generations into continuing what they started. I wrote to the Cocoa Board, the Nutmeg Association, and the government, telling them that I'm asking them to support me in setting up a project so we would work with it. Mr. Mitchell, Honorable Mitchell was the Prime Minister at this time. He said, the government can't deal with that, what I'm asking for. GCNA is the best project to deal with that. He put me on the board. My colleague was here with me. We were on the board at the same time. They laughed at me. He wasn't there at the time. They said, when these people come out overseas, they think they know it all, and they want to tell us what to do. We're not going to support her. Another one tell me he's NDC, and this present government, a project like that would show that the government is working. He's not going to support me. Another one tell me, when people do things like that, they get awards. And I don't want to see you going up and get an award. He didn't think of what would have happened in between the award getting and the development of the project. Today, I sat here and heard your second speaker speak about the major drop fall in nutmeg and maize. Granary Nutmeg Station is now a police station. Concord ain't there anymore. Florida, gone, long time. Where is our nutmeg? Where is our cocoa? A few days ago, I saw a chap from my village. I asked him, how is Jupa? He said, hey, this is what you're talking about? Jupa done that already? That is what I was brought up on, the nutmeg and the cocoa from these areas. And it has been neglected. Nobody continue it. And now today, we're still flying the flag with a nutmeg pod and a nutmeg on it, and we can't even open a nutmeg station. Don't pass by Grove. It looks like a ghost house. When Grove Nutmeg Station was the busiest part of Grove. I don't know what you all would have to say about that, but I feel grossly angry about the way we have allowed nutmeg and cocoa to go to the dogs. I also have a burning issue. I'm one of the elderlies who still existing, from those of us who left from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and we've returned. Without us and Morris Bishop, Grenada would never be what it is today. But as elderly people, we don't have no health care. I have a receipt here for $200 I had to pay for laboratory services. And not a health visitor, not an elderly social service person visits us. Where I live, the whole area are returnees. We don't see nobody. Nobody looks after us. And I think that's unfair. Another burning issue I have is where we bury our dead. I come from Unplazy. And from the Hamiltons right down to the bay is a cemetery. Behind everybody's house is a graveyard. There's the previous speaker spoke about the wasted lands that we have. We could build a cemetery. We could build a proper cemetery. 10 acres of land. You have a lot of land wasting up there. When I came, I raised it with the MP that was on. That was Clarice Charles. She said, government doesn't give cemeteries. The people have to supply the land, and the government will do what's next. I've been begging the people in my area for the longest while. Let's get together. We have to dead and leave the land, and we have to be buried in it. I don't know if my MP is not here tonight, but I don't know what could be done, but we need a cemetery. And not just Montplaisir. I go to funerals, since I came back, I go to funerals all the time, and people being buried behind the house. People who don't have place to bury, they go in Tongue, they go in Guelph. Guelph people need a cemetery, Tongue people need a cemetery. Every village need their own cemetery to bury their dead. And I think this is one of the things that we need to look at. Thank you.
Let me thank you for your suggestions and comments again, and I will try and just show a little light on some things that probably we might think is out of the box. I'll start with the cemetery issues. Throughout Grenada, there are cemeteries that have long lived and outlived their usefulness and so on. There is no more spot in the cemetery to bury our dead. Now, I don't want you to go out there and say, Mr. Cornwall, say, why not consider something called cremation? I'm not suggesting that to you. But if for 100 years we have been burying our dead in cemeteries or behind the house or in the land that we farm and so on, do you know that those things defeat the purpose of making those things economically viable? Because you can't sell a cemetery. If you have a house and you have a cemetery behind it, that land becomes useless. So I'm just showing out this to say Grenada or Grenadians should start looking outside the box and see if we can come up with some other alternative to our dead in terms of what we do with it at the end of the day. Again, I am not saying cremate your bodies, but we have to look at it. I understand that when you bury somebody in the soil and the coffin deteriorates and so on, the caustic soda and the embalming fluids that we use to prepare the body for burial, it ends up in our water source. Do we know that? All right, so that's why I'm saying that we have to be careful about those things and so on. I hope Mr. St. Clair is not listening to me tonight. That's the man that is the CEO of the Nutmeg Association in Grenada. But if you are, if I say to you the last time that the white elephants that were built during the heydays of nutmegs, they are still around, and we have made some use of some of them. There's one in Bolivia right now. I think it has become a value-added institutions so that we can basically make some further value-added use of our nutmegs and so on. I'll give you an example of a country that was #1 in the world that produces cocoa for the UK market and so on. You know what they did over the years? They have learned that we cannot continue bagging our cocoa and send it to Europe and so on and then import the Smilo and the Milo and those things. So they have taken some years and some pain, and now they are doing their own processing on their soil and sending out the value-added product. Grenada may have to take a page from those entities and so on. Because if we don't do that, we'll be continue being the supplier of raw materials, for the countries that have the expertise and the machinery to do it, and we turn around and import them Milo, all the brand names outside there. So we have to look at that. And I'm saying that probably we have persons in the country that probably can come together and build those factories that can process them. I'm happy to see, for example, the Belmont estate, for example, that use their cocoa and they make their chocolate, and now the chocolate is being exported to other countries around the world. So we have to start thinking outside the box. And don't believe what happened in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and so on will continue. It cannot continue. Yes, we have pools that we have been using in the past for storing our nutmegs in bags and so on. And some of them are no longer there. For example, the Grand White one that you said. There is a police station in there. And that is so because, again, over the years, we did not look at our police officers and where they live or where they sleep and so on. So now that, take for example, the one in Gulf on the waterfront. It is having its share of difficulties and so on. We have to fix it. The one in Grenville, the same story. We have to fix it. But, as I said before, all those things take serious resources to make sure we can turn around this thing. And this government has started to basically look into those things very seriously. Look on the Carenage. We moved the headquarters of the police from Fort George to the Carenage and so on. We spent a good bit of money there and so on. But the Fort George has now been converted into a tourism-related project that would basically add value to our tourism business down the road. And again, sometimes the decisions look very hard to take, but it's got to work for us in the long term. But we have to have the wherewithal to take those decisions now. It may look antagonistic, but if we do it within the time frame, we certainly will be able to change around things in Grenada. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your response. Yes, we have another speaker.
Good night, Head Table.
Good
My
night.
name is Toya Francis. And thinking outside the box, I have that idea. All the weed, you guys, the police arrest, and you check the street value, 1 point something million. Why not sell it over to the countries that legalize weed and use that money and help build facilities, buy machinery, the hospital needs stuff. Why not use that money instead of your burn half? That's just thinking outside the box. And for the fishing industry, you have seasons when we have a lot of fish, the value drop. Why not create a facility where they could clean the fish and sell it? I think if we as people on the island get the fish clean, we're going to buy more. It's not easy to come from work 5, 6. You want fish, going up on a bus. If you get it clean, like chicken in the supermarket, well packaged. Why can't we package our fish and sell it at the supermarket as well? I think it's simple, it's just putting things in place. That's all for tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments again, and I don't want to have to say that I will take over the conversation tonight. Right? Grenada is 133 square kilometers. We have 120,000 people maximum on this island. Do you know Grenada's ocean is about 11 or 12 times the size of the landmass that we have here? So our maritime resources, we can do a lot more with it. In fact, the government has taken a decision to create a Ministry of Marine Resources and so on. And that is to basically try and maximize or make better use of our ocean around us and so on. I mean, our fishermen, they don't go to fire now. I don't know if because they fear that they might drift into other territories and so on. But we need to basically take our resources a bit more seriously and get ourselves equipped to make sure we can maximize our maritime resources. I mean, it's always a laugh for me and so on. Guave is the capital of fishing, Grenada. along with Petit Martinic. And there are more fried chicken shops in Guave than one would anticipate. You don't eat your own fish. Does that make sense to you? And yet, we go and import all this back and neck that stays on the sea for months and years. We don't know when last that chicken was killed, but we are happy to basically marinate it and fry it and provide it as a service. I think we need to look at, for example, utilizing our marine resources much better. And I'm not talking only about the fish, but you have the sea moss. Sea moss is a very good source of food for us. And I'm happy to see some farmers actually started using their skills to basically do the sea moss production and so on. But again, we have to assist them, we have to help them. We have had challenges with our fishermen themselves. We tell them when they're going out to sea, they should have the equipment and the radios and the cell phones and the ice and so on to make sure that they can stay longer out there. Some people blatantly refuse to use the equipment that is required to be outside there. Then how can you basically maximize your production outside there? We have had requests for concessions on almost everything that goes in the sea. The boats, the fuel to go out in the ocean and so on. And we have considered some of those in the past and willing to look at them. But again, it has to be done in a proper manner. If one individual cannot do it, what about these cooperatives that we can put together and so on, and basically a larger quantity of persons get involved in it and make a better business out of it and so on. So again, thinking out of the box is not bad. But we have to find ways and means, and not only the government, because the government alone cannot do it. We know we have challenged a bait for the fisherman who goes out there and fish. Why can't somebody do a business in creating bait for the fishermen? I mean, I would go back the years I lived in Grenada in the 90s. When I'm coming up the West Coast, you had so much flying fish. Flying fish knocking dog on the street. Where is that flying fish today? I don't want to say where they're gone. Because on the north, Barbados looking for them, and we were looking for them. It means that we didn't manage our resources properly, and that's why today we don't have any flying fish out there. We do have jacks coming in, and the robin, and the smaller jacks coming in and so on. I think if we don't manage our resources properly, sometime down the road we may lose that too. So folks, yes, I think we have a lot of resources that we have to basically harness, and we must work diligently in making sure it happens. If we change our eating patterns also, it can help us, Because if we utilize the fish that we now have around us and cut back on the chicken, some of us are chicken lovers, me too, but I prefer to come down the road and buy a 2-pounder Jacks and so on, even if they charge me $10. And then again, I ask myself, why should quality fish like dolphin and swordfish and so on in Grenada cost that much? Is it that we don't utilize it, or we allow the chicken to take over the market and so on? Just think about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your comments. I think we've had some really good contributions from you, the audience, and some good ideas that can be considered for the budget 2026, as well as even moving beyond 2026. Do we have any other persons in the audience we have just a few minutes left for tonight. We can take one more contribution.
Good night to the head table. My name is Wilbert Sam. I just have one suggestion to give to the head table. I don't know how we are looking at it, but I think we are losing our young people through alcohol and drugs. I remember growing up, we used to have a program called the DARE program. And I'm a product of the DARE program because when I used to go to that program, it used to teach us how to resist drugs, how to resist alcohol, and the ills of alcohol and drugs. And I know it was a sponsored program from an agent overseas. I don't know how the government are looking at it, but I think that that program should come back on stream. Because how it's looking now is that our young people are gravitating now to alcohol, they are gravitating to drugs, they are gravitating to a lot of illegal activities that are captivating their minds. If you look at modernization, you will find that, as the two speakers before spoke about nutmeg and cocoa. Nutmeg and cocoa used to be the thing of the day in the past, but that is not so now. We are not teaching our children how to fork, how to spade, how to do whatever in agriculture. What we are teaching them is to go behind a desk. And most of our children are gravitating to that because it's the easier way out. It's not a hard work. So I do think that more emphasis should be put in place, to kind of teach persons how to be entrepreneurs instead of walking behind people. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Again, good suggestions, and we will take some of them on board. I think there was one other gentleman that wanted to make some comments, and I think it would be unfair for us to leave here without allowing him to do so. So, gentlemen, take the mic.
No, I spoke already, but I just want...
Now you can come back. We give you that opportunity.
I spoke already, but I just wanted to come back just to condemn the American on what they did to you and what they decided to do.
Let me just say one thing. Sir, I want to remain a free man in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. So I wouldn't want to respond to that, and I think we should leave the matter dead for now.
Okay, all right.
So we've come to the end of our consultation here at St. John's Anglican School. On behalf of the Ministry of Finance, we'd like to thank you, audience, for coming out tonight and sharing so impactful in suggestions for moving Grenada forward as well as transforming our communities. I'd like to say thanks to the Minister and Acting Prime Minister for sharing with us tonight. So let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. To our two presenters, Ms. Akiba Andrews from the Budget Unit, thank you for sharing on the budget process. And Mrs. Kamika Donald Hopkins for sharing on the fiscal landscape. Thank you very much for doing such a good job. So on behalf of the Ministry of Finance, once again, thank you and do have a good night, especially to those who are viewing us online. Thank you and God bless you all. See you in St. David's tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the St. David's RC School for the consultation there tomorrow evening. Thank you.